Welcome to In Focus with Ejaz Haider. Our top story tonight is about a decision last Wednesday by a special court in Lucknow to acquit all accused in the case involving the destruction of Babri Mosque. The 16th century mosque in Ayodhya, a town in the Indian state of Uttar Pradesh, was destroyed by a mob on 6 December 1992. Among the accused in the case was also India's former Deputy Prime Minister and Bharatiya Janata Party leader Lal Krishna Advani. Some commentators, including in India, have called the destruction of the mosque a watershed moment in the history of modern India. Be that as it may, it led to much rioting and left thousands dead. An earlier controversial verdict by the Indian Supreme Court on 9th November 2019 was seen as placating the hardline Hindu right. The court, while calling the demolition a violation of law, nonetheless ordered the government of India to create a trust to build the Ram Mandir temple and form a board of trustees within 3 months. On 5th August this year, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurated the construction of the temple on land awarded by India's Supreme Court for constructing the temple. Now, the decision by the special court in Lucknow seems to be the culmination of that sorry chapter in India's recent history. On the day of the mosque's destruction, Advani and others who were acquitted last Wednesday were present near the site and made incendiary speeches. The court, however, noted in its argument that the audio of the speeches, which was submitted as part of evidence gathered by the Central Bureau of Investigation, were not clear. The court also ruled that the incident was not pre-planned and the leaders present there actually tried to control and pacify the mob. But let's get into the discussion. We are joined by Mr. Nishant Varma, a legal and political analyst and activist. We will also be joined by Salman Akram Raja, who is an eminent lawyer. But meanwhile, we have with us Dr. Yaqoob Bangash, a historian of modern South Asia. Let me kick off the discussion with the viewpoint from Mr. Varma. Mr. Varma, it seems to me that the Lucknow court has kind of taken a leaf out of the Supreme Court's book, whose decision, as I said, was controversial, and that controversy was expressed by many a legal mind in India also. So give me your reading of this current decision.
I have a very awkward feeling. I feel that it is going a bit overboard. Reason why I say is because we in this subcontinent know how prosecution functions. Now, I understand that this special court has limitations of taking a call in terms of the kind of petitions that they face and the evidences which are produced. Even if there is something in the minds of the judge and the magistrate, they may not be able to go out of the boundary of what has been presented to them. It may be still a jurisdiction of a high court or a Supreme Court, but not of these courts. So by and large, what I feel, the kind of judgment that has come out is basically politicization of the prosecution, which under the right-wing hardline government that currently we have in the state of Uttar Pradesh under Yogi Adityanath and Mr. Narendra Modi in the center, is playing its politics. This is a very frank opinion. I do not mince my words, whichever channel, India, Pakistan, or globally I sit. My clear rating and understanding on this particular judgment is that this is a politicized prosecution which has gone ahead and presented deflated facts, evidences which were not up to the mark, and hence this magistrate had no option probably but to give in terms of, when I say given, not given constitutionally, but whatever was presented. So I assure majority of Indians are unhappy with letting going people of the likes of Advani, Uma Bharti, who are definitely the culprits, as per me, who got this Babri Masjid demolished.
Now, that's a insightful comment, Mr. Varma, and I completely agree with you that the judge has to go by what the prosecution offers it and whether the prosecution does have a watertight case. Now, given that, and given your comment with reference to politicization of prosecution, give us some more detail in terms of what exactly does this mean? Does this mean that the CBI was prevailed upon by the state government or the central government? Was the prosecution asked to dilute its case? What exactly happened?
Mr. Haider, this is nothing new. In India, at least I can speak for, I cannot speak for other countries. Now, if we recall 2002 Gujarat riots, I per se am very sure who caused it, who initiated and who ended it. But then as the time passes by, we see that the culprits are basically acquitted. Why? Because prosecution, the local police or the local officials, they fall prey to politicization. Same has happened here. This was a watertight case, say, until a day before the judgment was passed. Why? Because anything and everything, I am a legal activist, I follow these cases. Whatever were presented by the agencies was watertight against these people. I recall for a short moment the Honorable Supreme Court, while provisioning the order previously last year about the Babri Masjid Ram Janam Bhoomi matter of Ayodhya, recalled that it was a mosque, it was demolished, and so on. So, prima facie, the criminal act of demolishing a place of worship has taken place. Now, we also see people of the likes of Sadhvi Pragya who were involved in several activities, anti-national activities. However, the courts have let them free. It's not the courts, I remind you. I remind the global fraternity here that in courts, if the prosecution goes slow or dull because it is favoring a political party while they are in power, this is an old factor, and this is the reason we see such unfortunate judgments, which I am sure will be taken up soon, because I anticipate that the condition in India is such that this central government may not last its own complete 5 years term, and hence the following succeeding government shall not let the culprits go. I think so, and I assure them.
Now, that's interesting, Ms. Varma, when you say that this particular government might not complete 5 years. I mean, what do you base that on? I mean, in the sense that this government or this party and this current Prime Minister have been returned by the people of India with a bigger headcount than last time in 2014.
Mr. Haider, you would recall in history, people such as Adolf Hitler, Idi Amin, and so on were also elected, and then they acted in a manner that they were hated by the populace of those countries. I personally feel as an analyst, this is happening here in India. I, yes, very well acknowledge and confirm that Mr. Modi and BJP came back in 2019 with a larger number. But that does not mean that in any country, let alone India, divisive politics of sorts can be permitted in a manner that lies, you know, how we term it, jumla, can continue. And I base my assumption of this particular government, which is NDA 3.0, which is also called Modi 2.0, shall not complete its 5 years on following grounds. Number one, whatever they had to do on the religious grounds as being right-wing politicians, they have not been able to accomplish. Whatever the Honorable Supreme Court has adjudged in the Ayodhya case, finally what we see, it's nearly a year now. Forget the Ram Mandir, nothing is happening there, and they can't hide behind Corona for that one purpose. Number one. Number two, economy of this country was a well-placed factor even in Modi 1.0, which is from 2014 till 19, because it was the predecessing governments which gave him a platter to play with. However, what has happened is a Gujarat model. In his chief ministerial days, he sucked up Gujarat, and Gujarat is one of the poorest states today. And today in India, you know, being our neighbor, that India was a vivacious, harping economy on betterment and growth and future. And today we have landed up minus 23.9. Thirdly, what is happening in this country is the lies that this government has been posing as their own political bravado, let be it the army men, about our military forces, about education, about women's safety, about health, about growth, about jobs. I mean, there's a long list, the program shall end. So when this happens, the unfortunate larger section of the society which is below poverty line and slightly above poverty line is realizing that hunger cannot be challenged by simply chanting someone's name or giving them position to sit in government. Henceforth, what you will see and observe as our neighbors is that this government is going to face, today also we are facing stiff tasks for this government when it comes to farmers, when it comes to women's safety. You are observant. You know that as a person from political analysis, I well know such governments, could it be of Indira Gandhi or Narendra Modi, they'll fall like pack of cards.
Right. Stay with me, Mr. Varma, because you put a lot on the table. Pull in Dr. Yaqoob Bangash here. Yaqoob Bangash, you obviously look at South Asia, modern South Asia. You study Pakistan also, and also very deeply India. Now, let me, I'll get back to the Ayodhya part of it, but I want you to comment on some of the points that Mr. Varma has raised with reference to why he thinks this particular government is unlikely to complete its term. Because this kind of goes against conventional wisdom, if I may, in the sense that Mr. Modi's popularity stays the same or has actually increased, despite very poor economic indicators, despite inefficiencies in terms of fighting COVID-19, despite a number of other failures. He seems to be relying still and going strong with reference to the majoritarian sort of streak that he has, been playing on. So give me your sense of how you look at it.
I actually, I wish that I could sort of think and argue that Modi will not complete 5 years. I actually think he will complete not only these 5 years, he might complete other 5 years, because I think the strain that he's working on, this Hindutva one, is actually has had a big shot in the arm through this Babri Masjid decision, first by the Supreme Court, and then of course a few days ago by this CBI court in Lucknow. And I think the sheer fact that they have now set the groundwork for the Ram Janmabhoomi temple will actually win him a lot of votes, because this just reminded me of this very interesting conversation that I had with Shashi Tharoor, who is this very stalwart member of the Indian National Congress and the member of the Lok Sabha. And he actually very interestingly pointed out, and he said that, in the last Indian elections, people did not look at their pocketbook. People did not look at the fact that the economy was not doing well in India. But they actually voted in terms of religion. They voted in terms of, this jingoism against Pakistan. So yes, the economy is not doing well, will perhaps continue to do badly, but I think that's not really the decision that people are making, that they will vote according to that. And if you look internationally in the world too, populism is not based on a robust economy or other indices being good. It is based on jingoism. It is based on hatred of the other. And things might be going really badly, but as long as this is going well, this hatred, the people get re-elected. And I think Modi will continue to do that. Now, coming to the question on this judgment, in a way,
Yaqoob, let me hold you there before we get to the judgment, which is, of course, very important. Mr. Varma seems to be arguing, and there is, and he seems to be doing it on a solid ground, that yes, religion has played a part. Yes, religion and religious populism is likely to continue to play a part. But given very high rates of unemployment, which are likely to increase, given the state of the economy, where a number of sectors are actually registering negative growth, given the fact that Mr. Modi's entire sort of development platform that he talked about seems to have come crashing down, and he's increasingly relying on this. So there's got to be a limit to which you can actually exploit this sentiment. I think that's what Mr. Varma is arguing. But you seem to suggest that even if he does not begin to make progress on other counts, he would still be able to exploit the religious populism card.
And I think why? Well, I'll just give you a couple of reasons for that. Well, one main reason for that is that as things get worse, you need kind of someone to blame it further on. So Modi, and I am a history person, and we have seen it multiple times in history. Look at what happened in Nazi Germany when economic conditions became bad in Nazi Germany. They didn't say that, oh, it's our fault and we need to revamp our economic system. They blamed it on the Jews, and it's the same thing in other parts of the world too. So in India, as things are getting worse, they are going to increasingly blame everything on the Muslims because that's an easy scapegoat. And the BJP already has very little truck or very little space for the Muslims in any case. So to making them a scapegoat, already they have those camps in Assam. They try to push through other kinds of legislation. So this thing will actually continue. And what I would want to reiterate was the bad economy is not of today. The bad economy was there in the last election. It didn't matter. Everyone thought it will matter and Modi will lose votes. They came back with a thumping majority. So the bad economy can only go so far. The unemployment rates can only go so far.
Right. I get your point. Let's okay.
There is no opposition there.
Yeah, Yaqoob, your point. Give me your quick reading of the verdict itself before I go back to Mr. Varma.
On the verdict, I generally do agree with Mr. Verma, but I would add that one of the things that people actually forget is that the Indian judicial system since the 1980s used to be this very important vanguard of people's rights and the protection of rights and everything. And the Indian Supreme Court actually made a name for itself in having lots of suo motu notices and coming up with really cutting-edge judgments. So, of course, last year the Indian Supreme Court, I think, blackened its own name through the Ayodhya judgment, and then today the CBI court is doing the same thing there. But it's really fascinating that I was even reading the Indian Supreme Court judgment, and I'll just quote you one line from it. It said that the entire, and this is a direct quote from the Indian Supreme Court judgment on the Babri Masjid case, and it says, the entire structure of the mosque was brought down in a calculated act of destroying a place of public worship. So even the Supreme Court has acknowledged that it was a calculated act, ipso facto that there was a conspiracy. And if the CBI court really can't see that, then, it is a shame. Even the Supreme Court has actually acknowledged this. And yes, you can have bad prosecution and have all those kinds of things, but the Supreme Court of India and lower courts in India in the past and even now have actually gone ahead and gathered information on them, by themselves. And this whole Babri Masjid thing, the videos are on YouTube, the pictures are easily available, everything is easily available. So if you can't really see that there is a conspiracy to bring down a mosque that even the Indian Supreme Court has actually acknowledged in its own judgment, then it's just quite a shame. But of course, with that, it is very consistent because what has happened in the last couple of years is that the Modi government has infiltrated the judicial system to such an extent. Initially, we actually thought that infiltrated only the upper echelons, and now with this magistrate's verdict, it is very clear that even at the lower court level, everyone is towing the line, everyone is towing the Modi line, and are actually disregarding these huge public spectacles that have been put up. Every single politician, except of course the BJP, has actually decried this judgment. And as Vasidin Sahab has said a very interesting, he was giving his statement, and he made an interesting point, and he said, well, then this judgment should have explained how through some miraculous or some magical way, the whole Babri Masjid came down. If there was no conspiracy to bring it down, did it miraculously just fall apart on that day? Are all those pictures false? Are all those speeches that we all have heard, not just in India, everywhere around the world by L.K. Advani, Murli Manohar Joshi, Uma Bharti, are all of them actually false? So it is a deliberate, they've actually deliberately closed their eyes to these to a lot of evidence that has been there. And the conspiracy, the ultimate aim, what was the aim of this movement, this Rath Yatra, to go and, kind of do a big jalsa and then run away? No, it was very clearly from day one, the idea was that there's enough evidence for it, that it was to take down this mosque and put up a mandir in its place.
And to then exploit it.
Of justice
and to then exploit it for political purposes. And then actually, if you look at how the vote bank increased, that seems to suggest that the ploy actually worked. But thank you so much, Dr. Yaqoob Bangash, for speaking with us. Let me go back to Mr. Varma here. Mr. Varma, Dr. Bangash has put a lot of ideas on the table. In fact, he has also made the valid point that even the Supreme Court, despite other issues with the final verdict, actually surmised that it was a calculated, deliberate act, something that the special court does not seem to have agreed with. So overall, if we try and sort of, unpack this, we've seen that the media, for the most part, not everyone, there are honorable exceptions, of course, for the most part, toe the BJP line. Now, if we also have the judiciary sort of becoming, subservient, if I may, to what the BJP wants, then the space for conscientious Indians who have basically relied always on a pluralist approach, that space would be drastically shrinking. And I'm assuming that is something that must worry you.
Mr. Haider, there were three parts now that I need to address here. First of all, I, in the initial comment itself, told everyone that, yes, I do personally, and as well as most of the Indians, have a reservation against the order which was provided by the Honorable Supreme Court last year on this Babri Masjid Janambhoomi matter. However, being on the panel, your panel, I take strong objection to Mr. Yaqoob Bangash's statement where he says that Indian Supreme Court blackened its face. No, they did not blacken its face. Yes, there can be differences. There can be critical analysis.
I think he was making a comparison with reference to the Supreme Court's earlier activism in terms of suo motu notices and, being the guardian of the rights and all that. So I think he said what he said with reference to that contrast in terms of what the Supreme Court traditionally did and what it did last year.
It cannot be generalized in this manner because all the courts across the globe, even in India today also, take suo motu actions, may not be on A, but rest of the matter. So that remains. However, having said that, let me go back to the pointer about his question that Mr. Modi may have these 5 years as well as the next 5 years forthcoming. Probably he needs to dig into the Indian politics and its scenarios. Yes, probably he based it on the Hindu right-wing activism that he is probably talking about Mr. Modi's forthcoming 10-15 years, which is not the case in India. Indian electoral politics, Mr. Haider, has a unique game. And I'll tell you what, we have to go back to 2004 to understand that. It was Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee, the right-wing Hindu prime minister that India had when the elections were on. There was no contender against, no contest against Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee, no stalwart leader, no opposition, shining India. Indians did not look at their pocket, as he rightly points out, in 2019 and still voted. And Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee was thrown out for good. And last we saw when his last rites were happening. So that's not the way of Indian electoral politics. Religion does play a role, but it's not a religious country, number one. Number two, when it comes to 2019, Mr. Yaqoob Bangash did rightly point out, you also said in the program, that prior to 2019, whatever the numbers were, Mr. Modi came back with a larger number. Someone needs to understand this, that Mr. Modi and BJP got a larger number from the northern Indian belt. And that is thanks to Pulwama, which was initiated, acted, and carried out by someone through the RSS, because otherwise Kashmir, is such a secured place that even a crow cannot fly without the military permissions. We have seen how DSP Devinder Singh has been let go with no charge sheets happening. So there is a plan which is a dirty politics, even using, and rightly as I said in my first opening comment, that even military has been used not to act against our neighbors or so on, but within the country to gain votes. So let's not go there, because when he gave an example of Adolf Hitler, we must remember that such egoistic people, without taking names, I would say their end is a sad end. Let's not look at that. The positive end is that the right-wing BJP government shall fall, because hunger would not kill us, will kill the government, is my point.
Right. Mr. Varma, I'm also joined by Salman Akram Raja, who is a very eminent lawyer and a frequent commentator on issues of constitutionalism. Mr. Raja, we were talking about this particular verdict by the special court in Lucknow, which has acquitted the 32 accused in the Babri Masjid destruction case. So just give me purely, your legal sort of view in terms of how you look at it.
Ejaz, I've obviously not seen the judgment. I believe it's a judgment written in the Hindi script and not widely available. But what I can, kind of surmise is that the court must have been not presented with evidence. And what happens in cases like this is that the prosecution and the courts really get together when an acquittal is to be engineered. The prosecution does not present the necessary evidence. The witnesses resile, if there were witnesses to begin with. That is generally procured. And at the end of the day, the court is able to then go through the statements of all the witnesses and say that none of them has identified the accused as being present on the site or as having participated in the conspiracy to carry out the crime, in this case, the destruction of the Babri Mosque. So that, I expect, is what must have happened. That's a fairly standard operating procedure in procuring acquittals when the state is so interested. So it's a sad turn of events. Clearly, one expects the judicial system to uphold some basic values. One expects the prosecution in a state to remain somewhat objective. And if that is not what has happened in this particular case, then one can only lament that and hope that the superior judiciary looks through the matter and maybe directs a retrial or a re-examination of the evidence, and some kind of justice can be done, because a major crime was obviously committed before everybody's eyes, and for the court to not be able to find anyone responsible is more than mildly ridiculous.
Right. Interestingly, Varma also made this point with reference to the prosecution. But before I wrap up, Mr. Raja, I want you to give me your sense of, trying to situate this verdict or the earlier verdict by the Indian Supreme Court on this issue in the broader sort of changing context of India under the BJP.
Clearly, the change that has happened or is happening in India has impacted its judiciary. The decision in November regarding the underlying dispute about Ayodhya, again, was something that really reduced the whole thing down to a property dispute, as if the only thing that really mattered was title to the underlying land, who owned it 500 years ago, and once that is established, nothing else matters. All other questions of rights, community rights, religious sensibilities, human rights, none of that seems to matter much. And that clearly is a departure for the Indian Supreme Court. We've seen the Bhagwati and the Krishna Iyer Supreme Courts of the 70s and the 80s. And we know that the Indian Supreme Court has had the capacity to stand up for basic rights. But that seems to have all evaporated. And what we see at the moment is an institutional takeover in India by a particular ideology. Now, whether this is going to last very long, or whether this tide will recede, we don't know. But what we see at the moment is certainly tragic.
Right. Any final comments, Mr. Varma? I've got a couple of minutes left, but I want to ask you for your final word on this discussion, especially with reference to what Ms. Raja has said.
Sure. I just wish to make two quick points here. Number one is regarding judiciary and how prosecution fails the citizens is. You don't have to go back much further. You can go back to Mr. Modi's chief ministership in Gujarat. We all remember how a temple called Akshardham was attacked. After that, n number of Indian citizens were arrested, especially from a particular religious community. And lastly, what happened was not one was convicted. So this happens when there is a trade-off of variety of kinds. Similarly, in the Babri Masjid matter, what I foresee is that, as Advocate Saab was talking about, I don't see it going to the higher judiciary because it can only be CBI, which can go further into the higher judiciary to appeal. But then what is going to happen is that people will move into higher judiciary against, as rightly pointed out by Yaqoob Bangash, about the portions of the previous judgment on a different matter and now on this matter. So it will take its own time in order to get a final say, whatever it may be. But yes, when you say that the judiciary or other departments of the governance have become, part of some ideology, there could be some, some ingress of some ideological people. But India is too large to be controlled by any one single ideology. Remember that this ideology is currently prevailing in the northern part of India, and they have acknowledged BJP to come back to power. But rest of the India is also very much part of India, and this northern part is now getting fed up of this ideology. It may seem hunky and dory just because our most part of media toes Mr. Modi's line and sells him out there in order to get TRP and advertisement. This won't last long. If I can add, there is a line in Hindi which comes from Gita Updesh. I'll tell it in English also, its translation. It says, Parivartan sansar ka niyam hai. That means changes are inevitable. Mr. Modi knows it. It's going to end soon.
Absolutely. Thank you. That was Mr. Nishant Varma. Thank you also to Mr. Salman Akram Raja for his comments. We shall take a short break and return to discuss the inauguration of a strategic tunnel by India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Himachal Pradesh. Stay with us. Welcome back to In Focus. Our second story tonight is about the inauguration of a strategic tunnel by India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Himachal Pradesh. Himachal, a northern Indian state, borders China. The tunnel is named after the late Indian Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee. Reports from India claim it is the longest highway tunnel at 9.2 kilometers. Not sure if the Norwegians would accept that claim, given how often they dig tunnels, and the Lerdal tunnel is more than 24 kilometer long, but that's not the point of our discussion. The Atal tunnel is a strategic one that cuts travel time by 4 to 5 hours, so it becomes vital as a line of communication for Indian Army at a time when tensions are high with China. China already looks askance at India's infrastructure development in border regions with China. Interestingly, the tunnel was hyped on Indian TV channels precisely in relation to tensions with China. And those tensions are the point of our discussion tonight. We're joined by Suhasini Haider, national editor and diplomatic affairs editor at The Hindu. Well, Suhasini, as I said, we are not discussing the length of the tunnel. But given the tensions, and as I said, I was watching Indian TV channels, which is obviously an occupational hazard, and a central point that was being focused on by most commentators was this being the line of communication for the Indian Army and how important that was. Now, I'm assuming that that wasn't the only reason for the construction of the tunnel, and it hasn't happened overnight, but it seems to me that given the tensions, this is now a central point of signaling, perhaps, that is being done unofficially.
Right, and Ejaz, I think the 9-kilometer record is actually about some kind of surface to the tunnel that they don't have anywhere else in the world yet. It's been built actually with a German company and a Turkish company as well. And as you pointed out, the fact is that it is being seen as an important step for India's infrastructure, particularly when it comes to its border with China. This is not so much because of the Himachal proximity to China. This is, of course, the Pir Panjal ranges that it goes through, but because of the fact that it leads to Ladakh. and cuts the travel time to Ladakh by about 5 hours, and is in fact one of the real bottlenecks normally in the winter months when you go through these ranges. And it's been felt for a very long time that this and of course the tunnel between Jammu and Srinagar were both places where Indian infrastructure, particularly for its defenses, have been lacking. So in a sense, the government feels it is really plugging what has been a real loophole in India's border defenses.
Right. So it's been on the Indian side primarily constructed by what you call the Border Roads Organization. Have I got that right? And is that part of the Indian Army?
The Border Roads Organization works alongside and has many officials from the Indian Army. It works in other places as well. Bhutan's roads, for example, have been built by the Border Roads Organization as well. But this has been an amalgamation of different companies that are working together on this. But the truth is that it is an important piece of infrastructure for the Indian Army.
Okay, so let's get to the tensions. Now, we have seen that what most people were fearing in terms of conflict was averted after Mr. Jaishankar and Wang Yi's meeting in Moscow, which obviously followed the earlier meeting between the defense ministers. But it seems from the 5 points that emerged that we don't find the term line of actual control in those 5 points. In fact, those 5 points mention border areas. Now, which becomes even more amorphous and nebulous, if you ask me. But so far, I think the immediate issues seem to have been sorted out. Give me a sense of what's actually happening on the ground at this point.
Well, Ejaz, as you pointed out, the meeting in Moscow between the two foreign ministers was certainly seen as bringing down the temperature between the two countries. You pointed out that there are differences in the agreement, in the sort of language perhaps that India uses when it comes to the LAC or what China uses. These were officially stated as well. And if you notice, when the two foreign ministers came out with a joint statement which had this 5-point agreement, it was followed quite shortly by a statement put out by the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs and another statement by the Indian Ministry of External Affairs, both of them stating what their positions remain. So I think what you were seeing was a kind of stop the bleeding kind of exercise in Moscow, because tensions are definitely high between the two countries. And I think while the truth is that right now, since that meeting, we have not seen skirmishes, we have not seen any kind of precipitous action at the line of actual control, there is worry about the fact that there are these two armies and they continue to be amassed. The fact is, on the Indian side, no soldier is going to be pulled back until it is very clear that China actually keeps its commitments and China actually pulls back PLA troops that they began to amass in April along the line of actual control at different points, in fact, of the LAC. While these two armies remain there, I think obviously the worry is of some kind of a mishap, some kind of an accident sparking off something much more difficult. And I think that's been the root cause. Nobody is looking at the absence of violence right now as any kind of peace. And certainly there is a desire on the Indian side that the status quo that existed in April, the places where the Chinese soldiers have transgressed, all those areas will be reverted to the April positions. I don't know how long that is going to take. We have a history with China. It has sometimes taken much longer. But the truth is that for the moment, I think what you were talking about is that the hostilities have been maybe cooled for just a bit. But it's anybody's guess whether that kind of situation can continue while these armies remain amassed on both sides, while the fact is that neither side is willing to budge. And I should add, we are in a situation where both sides have taken heights on their sides of what they control, but they have taken those heights, which means that at various points, the Indian Army is at a leveraged position, and at other points, the Chinese army is at those positions. So I think there is a real concern about those as well.
Right. One final question, in fact, these are questions. One is that it does not seem to me that most analysts in India also, and the Chinese have also expressed this, think that the PLA troops are going to go back to the pre-April positions. So that's one. So I'm not sure how optimistic it is to think that they would. And secondly, notwithstanding anything else, what has happened has now converted the border areas or the line of actual control into a hard, hot line. And if you go by the terrain, I think the degree of difficulty of actually manning this area is way more than the line of control.
Well, certainly. I mean, the line of control, eventually you're speaking about, 1,000 odd kilometers. Here you're talking about 3,300 and more kilometers that are along the line of actual control. But look, what is clear is that neither side seems to want to escalate the situation right now. It is also clear that although most of the protocols that India and China had between them have been relegated to the past. The ones that have been negotiated since 1993 and then upgraded over the years certainly don't seem to stand today, given that there's been firing at the line of actual control, given that there have been deaths at the line of actual control. On the Indian side, at least 20 soldiers. On the Chinese side, the details are still coming. We might never know how many Chinese soldiers were killed because of the nature and secrecy that they maintain. But the truth is that India and China have had these issues before, and they have been able to manage them by and large, except for 1962 and 1967, and one skirmish there in 1975. So it's really a question, Ejaz, of whether they can stretch out the period of the ceasefire, if you like, the period of where there isn't action between the two of them, to a point where there can be a reasonable discussion. At the end of the day, the truth is that while the Chinese army may have felt that they could make these moves, that they could amass these troops in April, today it is quite obvious that the Indian army has pushed back, that the Indian army is not giving up an inch and is standing on its heights where it hasn't stood before. Also, that both sides have made it very clear that they are prepared for the winter months, that they will stay on those heights if there isn't some kind of a detente by then. So I think what we're looking at really could be a prolonged period of a cold peace. Your question about whether the entire LAC will now need to be manned is certainly one that is being discussed in Delhi. And I think in general there is an understanding that the kind of understanding there was between New Delhi and Beijing for these years is now been put aside. And a new understanding, if you like, or what people call a new modus vivendi, if you like, will have to be negotiated.
Right, that's what the 5-point statement also said. But thank you so much. That was Suhasini Haider speaking with us. This is all from In Focus tonight. We shall see you tomorrow at the same time. Keep following our latest updates on social media at indus.news. Good night and goodbye.